"I'm so tired." Those 3 words, whispered to his cousin Billy Smith just hours before his death, would haunt everyone who loved Elvis Presley. The date was August 16th, 1977, and inside the walls of Graceland, the king of rock and roll was fighting his final battle, not against critics or competitors, but against his own body and the demons that had chased him for years. The mansion that Tuesday morning hummed with its usual activity. Staff polished already gleaming surfaces, prepared meals that would go mostly uneaten, and maintained the illusion that everything was normal. But nothing had been normal for months. The man who once commanded stages with a single hip thrust now struggled to climb his own stairs. The voice that made millions swoon was often slurred by prescription medications. Elvis Aaron Presley, at just 42 years old, was a king holding court in a crumbling kingdom, and everyone pretended not to notice the cracks in the throne. Shadows at dawn. Contrary to his nocturnal reputation, Elvis stirred early that morning, around 10:30 a.m. by Graceland standards. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, later recalled how he sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, his bloated fingers drumming against his knee. The first thing he reached for wasn't water or food, but the rainbow array of pills lined up on his nightstand like loyal soldiers. His personal physician, Dr. George Nikopoulos, Dr. Nick to the inner circle, had already called twice before Elvis even opened his eyes. The relationship between patient and doctor had long ago crossed professional boundaries into something darker, more codependent. Elvis needed the pills to function. Dr. Nick needed Elvis to justify his prescriptions. It was a dance they'd perfected over years, each step bringing them closer to disaster. "Daddy's awake," 9-year-old Lisa Marie's voice echoed through the hallway. She burst into the room with the fearlessness only a child could possess, jumping onto the bed without regard for her father's fragility. For a moment Elvis transformed. The pain left his eyes, replaced by genuine joy. He tickled his daughter, sang a few bars of her favorite song, and for those precious minutes he wasn't the king. He was just daddy. But children see everything, even when adults think they don't. Lisa Marie would later remember how her father's hugs lasted longer that day, how he held her face in his hands and studied it like he was memorizing every detail. "You be a good girl," he told her, his voice thick with emotion she couldn't understand. "Always remember Daddy loves you." The morning routine continued with military precision. Joe Esposito, Elvis's road manager and friend, arrived with a stack of contracts and tour schedules. The upcoming tour, starting in just 2 days, loomed like a mountain Elvis wasn't sure he could climb. "Maybe we should postpone," Elvis suggested, not for the first time. Joe's face tightened. They'd already postponed twice. The promoters were getting nervous, the colonel was furious, and the financial pressure was mounting. Elvis waved him away with a promise to look at everything later. Later had become his favorite word. The restless hours. Noon at Graceland felt like midnight anywhere else. The blackout curtains ensured perpetual twilight, creating a cocoon where time lost meaning. Elvis wandered the mansion like a ghost haunting his own life, touching objects as if seeing them for the first time. He stopped at his trophy room, staring at gold records that seemed to mock him with their frozen perfection. The phone rang constantly. Colonel Parker called 3 times, each conversation more heated than the last. "You have obligations, boy," the colonel barked in his curious accent that Elvis had never quite been able to place. The word boy stung more than usual. At 42, with a failing body and a fracturing mind, Elvis felt ancient. Yet to the colonel, he would always be the hungry kid from Tupelo, desperate for fame and willing to sign anything. Something shifted in Elvis during that 3rd call. Witnesses reported he became unusually calm, almost serene. "Don't worry about the tour," he told the colonel. "Everything's going to be fine." The certainty in his voice was so unusual that the colonel actually paused. "You feeling all right, Elvis?" For once, the question seemed genuine. "Never better," Elvis lied, and hung up. He made several unusual calls that afternoon. First to Red West, his former bodyguard who'd been fired months earlier and had written a tell-all book about Elvis's drug use. The betrayal had cut deep, yet Elvis's voice held no anger. "I forgive you," he said simply. Red, caught off guard, could barely respond before Elvis continued, "We had some good times, didn't we?" The conversation lasted only minutes, but Red would replay it in his mind for the rest of his life. Next, he called Priscilla, his ex-wife. They discussed Lisa Marie's upcoming school year, custody arrangements, mundane details that suddenly seemed important. "You'll take care of her," Elvis said. It wasn't a question. Priscilla felt a chill despite the August heat. "We both will," she corrected. The silence that followed said everything. Do you think people somehow know when they're saying goodbye for the last time? A king's last supper. By 4 p.m., Graceland's kitchen was preparing Elvis's first real meal of the day. The menu had evolved over the years from simple southern comfort food to an elaborate spread that would shame most restaurants. But Elvis barely touched any of it, pushing food around his plate like a child avoiding vegetables. His cousin Billy Smith sat across from him, trying to spark conversation about the old days, but Elvis seemed to be listening to something only he could hear. "Remember when we were kids?" Elvis suddenly asked. "When everything was simple." Billy nodded, unsure where this was heading. Elvis continued, his voice distant. "Sometimes I dream I'm back there. No stages, no crowds, no pills, just us playing in the yard." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Funny how you spend your whole life running towards something, only to wish you could run back." The Memphis Mafia, Elvis's entourage of friends and employees, noticed his strange mood. He was giving away personal items, something he did periodically, but this felt different. A ring here, a watch there, each gift accompanied by a memory, a story, as if he was distributing pieces of himself. Charlie Hodge received a guitar pick Elvis had used during the '68 comeback special. "Keep it safe," Elvis said, pressing it into Charlie's palm. That was a good night. Around 6 p.m., Elvis made an unexpected appearance at the piano. His fingers, swollen from cortisone and fluid retention, struggled with the keys, but muscle memory took over. He played gospel songs, his favorite, "When the Darkness Crept Too Close." "He Knows Just What I Need" flowed into "Peace in the Valley," each song more plaintive than the last. Staff members gathered in doorways, sensing something sacred in the moment. Ginger tried to lighten the mood, suggesting they watch a movie later. Elvis nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He talked about his mother, dead now for 19 years, but still the only person he'd ever trusted completely. "She knew this would happen," he said cryptically. "She tried to warn me about the price of dreams." Ginger didn't understand, but she held his hand, feeling its tremor, whether from medication or emotion she couldn't tell. Midnight confessions. The summer heat finally broke around 10 p.m., bringing a thunderstorm that rattled Graceland's windows. Elvis had always loved storms, finding them cleansing, but tonight he seemed agitated. He paced his bedroom, picking up books and setting them down unread. His current obsession was spirituality. Books on religion, mysticism, near-death experiences littered every surface. Dr. Nick arrived for his evening visit, medical bag in hand like a dealer making a house call. The examination was perfunctory. Both men knew the real purpose was the prescription pad. Elvis's blood pressure was dangerously high, his ankles swollen, his breathing labored. "We need to get you to a hospital," Dr. Nick suggested, not for the first time. Elvis's response was always the same. "After the tour." But tonight, Elvis grabbed the doctor's arm. "What if I can't do it anymore?" The vulnerability in his voice was startling. "What if I go out there and they see what I've become?" Dr. Nick had no answer. How do you tell a god he's mortal? Instead, he wrote another prescription, handed over another bottle of pills, and promised things would get better. They both knew it was a lie. By midnight, most of the household had retired. Elvis sat in his bathroom, his sanctuary within a sanctuary, reading a book about the Shroud of Turin. The bathroom was more than just a place for hygiene. It was his library, his thinking room, his escape. Decorated in black and gold, with plush chairs and a television, it was where Elvis went when even Graceland felt too confining. Ginger found him there around 2 a.m., still dressed, still reading. "Come to bed," she pleaded. Elvis looked up, and for a moment she saw the man he used to be, young, vital, full of promise. "In a little while," he said. "I just need to finish this chapter." She kissed his forehead, tasting the salt of perspiration, and left him to his solitude. If she had known it was their last conversation, would she have stayed? The final performance, August 16th, 1977, 3 a.m. The king of rock and roll sat alone in his bathroom, surrounded by the artifacts of fame and the chains of addiction. The book lay open on his lap, but his eyes weren't focused on the pages. Somewhere between the nighttime cocktail of Dilaudid, Percodan, Placidel and Demerol, Elvis Presley's great heart finally said enough. There was no audience for this final performance, no spotlight except the harsh bathroom fluorescent. The man who had lived his entire adult life in public died in the most private of moments. His body, already in rebellion for years, simply stopped. The book slipped from his fingers, landing face down on the gold shag carpet. The king's throne had become his deathbed. Hours passed before anyone realized something was wrong. Graceland, so used to Elvis's erratic schedule, didn't think to check on him. It wasn't until 2:30 p.m., when Ginger finally woke and noticed his absence, that alarm bells rang. Her scream upon finding him would echo through Graceland's halls forever. A sound that marked the end of an era. The attempts at resuscitation were futile theater. Joe Esposito pumped Elvis's chest while crying. Dr. Nick arrived within minutes, but medical science couldn't resurrect what fame had slowly killed. By 3:30 p.m. at Baptist Memorial Hospital, Elvis Aaron Presley was officially pronounced dead. The king was gone, but the myth was just beginning. Within hours, the gates of Graceland were surrounded by thousands of mourners. Radio stations worldwide interrupted regular programming. Elvis Has Left the Building took on a permanent, heartbreaking meaning. The boy from Tupelo who just wanted to sing had become the cautionary tale of fame's ultimate price. Echoes of the crown. In death, Elvis achieved what had eluded him in his final years: peace. The autopsy revealed a pharmacological nightmare, 14 different drugs in his system, his heart enlarged to nearly twice normal size, his arteries clogged, his liver damaged. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, but everyone knew the truth was more complex. Fame, pressure, pills, and perfection had formed a fatal cocktail. The funeral was a spectacle Elvis would have hated and understood in equal measure. Thousands filed past his copper casket, seeing their king one last time. He wore a white suit, his face restored by morticians to a semblance of his younger self. Lisa Marie asked if Daddy was sleeping. Priscilla held her tight and whispered yes, a kind lie that would eventually become truth in the child's mind. Those who were there that final day carried guilt like souvenirs. Could they have done more, said something different, hidden the pills better? But Elvis had been dying for years, a slow-motion tragedy everyone watched but no one could stop. He was a force of nature, and like all forces of nature, ultimately uncontrollable. The Memphis Mafia scattered to the winds, each carrying their piece of the Elvis puzzle. Some wrote books, others gave interviews, all trying to explain the inexplicable, how the most vibrant performer of his generation became a prisoner in his own palace. But explanation isn't understanding, and understanding isn't acceptance. Even now, decades later, they dream of different endings. What keeps us hoping for different endings to stories already written? Graceland became a shrine, frozen in time like Pompeii. Millions visit annually, walking through rooms where Elvis laughed, cried, loved, and ultimately died. They see the grand facade, but miss the prison bars. They worship the king, but forget the man. And perhaps that's what Elvis wanted all along, to be remembered for the dream, not the nightmare it became. August 16, 1977, stands as a fault line in popular culture. Everything before and everything after. Elvis Presley died that day, but in dying, he achieved the immortality that had always eluded him in life. No more bad movies, no more bloated performances, no more pills to get through another show. Just the music, eternal and perfect, spinning on vinyl and in memory. The tragedy isn't that Elvis died at 42, it's that he'd been dying since he was 21 and signed his soul to Colonel Parker. Each compromise, each pill, each performance, when he should have been resting, they all led to that bathroom in Graceland. The king of rock and roll died as he lived, alone, despite being surrounded by people who claimed to love him. But perhaps there's grace in how it ended. No prolonged illness, no public deterioration. Elvis went from planning a tour to meeting eternity in the space of a heartbeat. For a man who lived in constant motion, maybe that sudden stillness was the peace he'd been seeking all along. The exhausted king finally got to rest. Today, when someone plays Can't Help Falling in Love, they don't hear the slurred words of his final performances. They hear the young man who changed the world with a song and a swivel. That's Elvis's real victory over death. He left us his best self, preserved forever in the amber of recorded sound. The pills, the paranoia, the sad final years fade away, leaving only the voice that made the world young again. The last day of Elvis Presley teaches us that gods are only men in costume, that fame is a fire that warms and burns in equal measure, that sometimes the kindest thing we can do for our heroes is let them be human. In his final hours, Elvis wasn't the king of rock and roll. He was a tired father hugging his daughter, a lonely man calling old friends, a soul seeking peace in books about eternity. And maybe, in those simple human moments, he was more royal than any crown could make him. The king is dead. Long live the king.